Yeah, please.
Wonderful. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for making it to this session. On a Saturday morning, you could have done any other thing, but you chose to come and be present here. So I acknowledge you for taking time out and attending this session. So let's get started. So how many of you see a story in this slide that I put up? So you can use the chat to comment whether you see a story or you don't see a story. That would be helpful to quickly understand whether you see a story. Wonderful. So that's good to know. So there is a combination of people who say that you see a story, and there is some who say you don't see a story. So if you look at this, I have used one sentence, which is hello data people. That is the crux of it. And I've translated the same into 3 different languages, Hindi, Mandarin native, and Spanish. And the story here is that the font size of each of these texts correlates to the proportion of people in the world who can speak this language. I picked up the top 4 spoken languages on the planet today. English being the largest with a little 1.6 billion people speaking English. Then followed by Mandarin, which is at 1.17 billion, followed by Hindi, then followed by Spanish. This is a story that you are seeing on this slide. So hope that story lands. Now let's look at the focus of this session, which is data and storytelling. What now? How do you combine these two to arrive at a engaging outcomes from your different opportunities that you tackle? In the business world, as well as in when you're talking to different people, you always have an intent to convey a message, and you hope that the message lands with the intended audience and they interpret the message that you have given in the same manner as you intended to. So let me start by sharing a story. This is my struggles with new tasks during the pandemic. I stay in Pune, and the lockdown started way early for us in Pune around 25th of March. And one new task that I had to pick up at home, like some of us, is I had to contribute in the household chores. Earlier, Kavitaji, our maid, used to come in the morning and mop and sweep the house, and she would roughly take 20 minutes to complete both the tasks. But when I had to take over the task because she was no longer available for us to help out, I had an impression that I go to gym, I'm athletic, and I can easily translate those skills to this activity. How hard it would be to clean the flat, which has a carpet area of say 900 square feet, and mop it. I can easily do it in 20 minutes or even faster than that. That was my mindset. But when I started the activity, I realized that for the first week, I actually took close to an hour to finish that activity on a daily basis. This is how hard the activity was for me. I was not able to complete the activity the way I was hoping to do it in a faster manner. Every time I went through the house, I had 2 boys, so they would follow me and say, you missed a spot, you missed a spot. And that's how my activity kept on taking more time. And I realized my agility in body does not translate to my ability to clean up the area well, which is an entirely different learning curve that I had to go through. So if you notice the graph, close to week 10, I came to a point where I was able to complete these activities in a 29-minute threshold on a daily basis. Then suddenly, if you notice week 11 and 12, the time I took got reduced further, 18 minutes, 13 minutes, and you see week 17, even I'm at 10 minutes. So the story here is not complete because what you see here is the aggregated number. But what really happened was I became lethargic, I became lazy, I started skipping the activity entirely for some days, so I didn't even do the activity. That's where the averages are resulting in this number. But the reality is in weeks where the threshold of who was hoping to do actually was because I was not performing the activity at all. So you see a story here where you have a data, the way it can be narrated versus the data, the way it has to be intended to be narrated for. This is my personal experience. If you switch context and pay attention to how data storytelling has been used by others, there is a important and a very impressive project called significantobjects.com. You can go to that website and take a look. Rob Walker and Joshua Glenn, they conceptualized this idea of taking everyday items that they purchase for X price and write a very engaging story about that product by a group of 20 or 30 writers, and they put all these products for auction. When they spend $250 buying these products and attaching that with a story, the total value of the products when they were auctioned off was $8,000, which is like a 3,000% return based on one factor, which is adding stories to that. My favorite story in that is Mario the Baker Mouse. This story talks about how this mouse was created by a lover of a school-going teenager as a separation gift, and how that teenager keeps this gift for the entire lifetime, and how she introduces this mouse character to their own children. This was a whole story about. So it's a very engaging way of looking at storytelling and how it adds value. What are the couple of, let's look at some of the reasons why this is a very successful way of adding value to a small product, which is worth 50 cents to someone, but someone, by reading the story for the same, has bought it for $62. For someone who has bid for $62, the value of that product was not just that small, cushy toy. It was a story that engaged, brought in emotion. So the storytelling forced people to remember what that doll has gone through so that they can act on it. And by virtue of you understanding this, you share these memories. That's what is the intended outcome of data storytelling. You want people to act on your analysis. And data storytelling is the critical element that would help people to bridge the gap of analysis to action. But if you look at it today, most of the analysis that is done is you always start off with, what did I do? Let's say it's a forecasting problem, I applied an ANOVA model. If it's a deep learning convolution-led model, I would say I applied a deep learning model using ImageNet data source. I applied a CNN architecture, say ImageNet or VGG19. That's the kind of starting point that we generally hear languages of. But what is critical for anyone to understand is to tell what actually happened. That's the only way when you realize you can understand the what happened, the why part of it, and what to do next. This is how data storytelling can contribute to different phases of a business process journey. Let's look at a typical business process workflow and see where data storytelling can add value. For solving any business problem, we start off with step one, which is identifying the business problem. Of the varied list of multiple problems that the businesses face, there is a creative exercise of identifying which of the problems is worth solving for, which of the problems is actually worth doable, and which of the probable problems that you identify can actually generate an ROI. There is this 3 checks that have to happen before you can say a problem is worth solving and investing more money, because budgets are squeezed. You have a limited pie that has to go around all possible ideas. So there is a great emphasis on identifying the right problem to solve. That's step one. Once you have identified the problem, today, the critical gap that you notice is the business teams who understand the problem well, when they turn to analytics teams or data scientist groups and say, this is a problem we want to solve, the data scientist team would essentially have 2 broad flavors. One, someone who understands the business very well, and these are very few in number, and some who understand the technology part of it and the different techniques and toolings very well. To bridge this gap, we need to convert this business problem to a data problem that can be understood by the analysts. That's step 2. Once you have a data problem defined, this data problem has to be put through as a different combinational analytic techniques. You decide based on what kind of statistics models you want to apply. Do you want to apply advanced analytics, machine learning models, or deep learning models, and arrive at a data answer. Once you have a data answer, let's say the forecasting model which you have put to use for market mix modeling has a R square value of say 0.5. Now, what do you do with that? Or you have a exercise where you're forecasting the sales for next quarter, and you're saying that the probability of the forecast being right with 95% confidence interval is X and Y. Does the business teams who have to consume this information, do they understand it? That's where the 4th milestone comes in, where you translate a data answer to a business answer. At this point, this is the logical sequence of how every business problem goes through the different solution stages. And in these 4 stages, there are 2 stages where data storytelling can have a big impact. Step 1, explaining the business problem and mapping it to a data problem. That is where data storytelling can add immense value to clarify the business problem, convert that business problem to a data problem, and make it easy to interpret. And once you have a data answer, translate the data answer back to a business answer. This is again where data storytelling can play a critical role. So at a high level, these are the 2 broad places where data storytelling will add value. And the next portion of the session will essentially focus on how do we enable data storytelling for these two areas of the business problem solving. So step one, you understand that you have data and you understand that you have a business problem. How do you explain and stitch these two together? Let's take one starting point. You have to understand who your audience is. Then you can determine what the story should be. For example, for the same data, let's in a business context, you look at the sales data for the last quarter. Each person who looks at the data has different questions. A board member would typically ask, so tell me what is the prediction for sales for the next quarter, so next year, because for them it's all about the big picture. For a product head, you would look at of the entire sales of the organization, what is the sales for the product I own and what is the proportion it grew. But when it comes to the sales head or the sales team, they specifically look at, did I meet my targets or not? How did the overall organization do? Doesn't really appeal to them much, but are not interested in others' questions. They always want to listen to their question. That's number one. So how do you translate this? You have to clearly articulate who your audience are for your analysis. So you identify who's the specific role and explicitly identify that person. The general assumption that you have a user persona is a well-known principle that is looked at. So having a specific person name tagged to identification of the audience is helpful. That's step one, so that you can narrate a story that the person would like. Let's look at what the problem is. Once you understand who the person is, the second step would be identifying what their problem is. This is where your understanding of the business problem comes into play. But you also have to explain the problem in a way that the intended audience can relate to. So you have to understand what their situation is. You have to understand what the problem they are facing, then what actions you propose that they should take, and what kind of impact can they expect. And remember, all this is even before you complete your project. You have to try and convince the person that this is the right thing to do. So if you take the structure and look at it, let's take an example of Stacy, a marketing head. She must create a region-wise budget for the next year, but she does not know what the region-wise ROI would be. That's the problem. So how can you take action? You prioritize regions where you think you can maximize your ROI. That's the impact you are combining. So this is how you can define a problem through this structure. Let's take three different examples from three different industries. These are examples from Gramener working with different companies, and I collated these from a contextual standpoint for today's conversation. Let's look at a person who is responsible for buying all the supplies for a brewery. I have breweries spread across entire Europe, and each of these plants that manufacturers, be it Scotch in Iceland, beer in Germany, wine in France, each of these plants would have suppliers who are supplying different products. Now, the challenge for that, excuse me, the challenge would be, how do I optimize my inventory, and how do I ensure the number of vendors I'm buying these products from is optimized for the benefit of the organization? But the problem would be that you wouldn't know which plant and commodities are creating this problem. If you ask every individual plant manager, they would always say that I'm buying the best mix of products in terms of quantity and timing. I'm buying it from the best vendors who can give us an attractive price. That's what everyone would assume to think. But the only way for action for a hiring team would essentially be looking at how do we consolidate all the different vendors across all my operations wherever it's logically possible, and identify the vendors and approximate quotas for each of these vendors, so that we can increase the discounts and we can negotiate better pricing from each of these vendors. This is how I would quantify a problem for a purchasing commodities if I were a large organization. If we switch context and look at a airline cargo service provider, Chris in this case, for a US Airlines, they have an SLA for the moment the plane lands in an airport. The cargo service provider has a 1.5 hour limit on offloading the items from the plane and take it to the warehouse. The current problem is there is a 15% additional time it's taking for the cargo service provider to offload the inventory to warehouse. But she didn't know where the problem is, because the biggest driver of number of people who are employed in each shift for morning, evening, day shift, the assets they have, things like forklifts, inventory, bubbles, wrap, each of these are in theory more than sufficient for their annual revenue in terms of the workload. But adding resources alone would not help. So they have to understand what are the levers that they can use to reduce the turnaround time with limited spend. And the last one is a telecom problem where Ravi, marketing manager, has to identify how do I reduce the customer churn? Because if a customer moves out, the cost of reacquiring a customer is 3 times the cost of retaining a customer. So that's a known thing. But the problem is, how do I decide which customers to offer promotional activities? So this is how you can start framing the business problem and translating it back to a data problem. These are 3 different ways that we have looked at. Once you get to this analysis, you have a series of analyses that are generated from the data. If you ask an analyst, they would talk about, I have run this analysis, I have these 40 different insights that I've identified, or the model has given me these different inputs. But we have to find a way to ensure the insights that the data answer contains has to be quantified in some fashion. You can use a domain-based quantification where you can apply business knowledge that is part of that particular business problem and identify these are important. Here we propose a structured way of doing the same. We categorize the insights into 3 broad categories. One is big. How substantial is the insight that it changes the entire outcome? Or how useful is the insight? If I take an action based on what you have found, does it improve any things objectively? And the last one is there a surprising element to what you found? On this one, I'll take a slight deviation. We always think that from data analysis, you will find a big gold mine or a big ticket insight that you find that will drastically change the entire business. But in practical business realities, there will be a series of minute insights that add up to a larger business value. You will never have insights that are so big enough that it can justify the entire investments. It is always a case of minute investments that result in incremental value. So how would this, if you put these insights through categories, big, useful, and surprising, let's take a few examples. For New York, there are twice as many restaurants than any other city. It's understood the Big Apple is a major world tourism spot, so it's expected that you'll have more restaurants. So it's a big insight. Is it useful? Yes. If you're trying to sell processed food, it's a big insight. But is it surprising? No, because you understand New York has a larger population, it has a larger tourist attraction, so restaurants will be higher. So this insight is only big and useful, but not surprising. Similarly, the sales increased in every region except the largest branch, where it dipped by 0.1%. Is this big? 0.1% reduction in sales is not significant. Nobody would stand up and look at it. But is it useful? Yeah. If my biggest branch is losing out on sales, it's something to watch out for. Is it surprising? Yes. I would rather the sales head would pick up the phone and call that region's head to call out why is that the sales are decreasing. Similarly, if you look at the third one, increase in rainfall increases the sale of umbrellas. Everybody understands this, right? Come rainy season, you would do that. Sales will increase because umbrella is needed, raincoats are needed. Is it a useful insight? No. Is it surprising? It is not. So filtering your analysis using this checklist would help you narrow down the quantified insights. So for the same 3 examples that we looked at, when we ran through the analysis, what we found was, let's start with the purchasing of commodities. The most common commodity was ordered 10 times a week from so many vendors, but that was expected. All the plants were operating in just-in-time manufacturing principles. So products were frequently ordered only to the extent that was required. So this was neither a big or a useful nor a surprising insight. Then the number of orders is correlated to number of vendors. This was definitely useful. Our conventional wisdom says that if you have lesser number of vendors, you're buying more from them. And if you have more vendors for a single product, you're buying less from each vendor. But this one turned the other way around. So this is useful. And specific plant P126 was a plant with the most violations. They were buying large commodities from large number of vendors. So this is a kind of big and useful insight so that you can go and act at the plant 126. Similarly, for the cargo delay, what you found was out of the different types of cargo, the fragile cargo was the one that was causing 20% of the delays, which is big and surprising. At the same time, Fridays are the days when cargoes are delayed the most. If you look at, I have a 7-day operations, and if Fridays alone has the largest delay, it is not, it doesn't change anything. So what? And having additional trained staff and forklifts impacts the delay. This is a big, useful, and a surprising insight. So by adjusting the number of forklifts that are available in a shift, you can reduce the delay significantly. That's the insight we found. And for the telecom player, the marketing manager, what we found was if the number of inbound calls does not impact, which means if someone is about to go and jump from your service to a different person's service, if you only focus on the inbound calls, it is not going to help you analyze or predict whether this customer is going to jump ship or not. That was a surprising insight. On the other hand, if a customer have not made any calls outgoing in the last 15 days, they are more likely to churn, which is a big insight. And if you look at the last one, customers making infrequent calls and recharging small amounts, like they are topping up with 10 rupees, 20 rupees alone, they are the ones that are at most risk of churn. So this insight is big, useful, and surprising. So these three examples convey that this technique of identifying and quantifying insights can be applied across multiple business problems and different contexts. Let's put this, let's see if you have got onto the bus and see if the last 2 minutes of explanation of insights and putting them through big, useful and surprising structure and put across these insights. Please feel free to use the chat to tell me what do you think of each of these insights. For a large computer manufacturer, what the online commerce team has found that 50% of the customers prefer to purchase accessories along with laptops. So is this a useful insight, or is it a big insight, or is it a surprising insight? Please use the chat function to type in your opinion. And the second one, a customer success team is looking at NPS scores, and they are looking at the detractors have contributed to the highest portion of revenue in data storage category. Now, this is surprising. Detractors are someone who are not happy with your offering overall, but they are contributing to the highest portion of revenue in one category. So what do you make of this insight? Please share your opinion on this one too. Then let's switch gears to a ITSM space where you have a customer support team, where let's assume Jira or ServiceNow. In these tickets, the insight is that 54% of emergency tickets, tickets that are raised as emergency as a flag on Thursdays and Fridays are misclassified, which results in longer turnaround time for closure of these tickets. Now, what do you talk about this? Is it surprising or big or even useful? Let's switch gears and take a sales problem. For a region, if you have one medical representative vacancy, you see an average of 14% drop in growth rate for over-the-counter drugs. Now, how would a sales lead or an area sales manager look at this statistic? Will they find it helpful, or would they find it not useful at all? And this stat I pulled out from a recent survey done by Small Business Administration in the US. 50% of American small businesses do not have a website. So how do you see this? Is it an opportunity to grow? Is it an opportunity that digital services can be offered to them more? How do you take this insight? And the last one is films led by women grossed 15.8% more on an average than films led by men. This is the insight. Is this surprising? Definitely it is surprising, but because we are all told, or we have come to the belief that male-led star movies have a larger revenue. But if you average it out based on the number of movies done by them and the age out, this is a proportional fact. So each of these insights that we looked at has a varying degree of representation in terms of being big, useful, and surprising. Let me offer one more granularity for this. In each of the big, useful, and surprising, we could further granularly identify them as whether within big, are they low, medium, high, and further have a layer of categorization. This would help us to have more depth in how we run the analysis and how we arrive at this data story. Okay, I see a bunch of responses come through on the chat. Thank you very much. We'll take a look at these. Now we have the insights. You have qualified insights. You have gone through a proper logical structure of saying that of the analysis I have done, I have identified insights. Then of these insights, I have gone through a specific structure of narrowing down the insights that are more helpful for narration. Now what? Now I have to narrate a story with the insights. The best way to narrate a story is talk about the takeaway. For a minute, engage with me. If you close your eyes and think of one childhood story that you can recollect. Just give it 10 seconds. Close your eyes and think of that one childhood story that you would easily remember. All right. If you had spent the 10 seconds to think about that story, what you easily remember are the stories and the summary of it, which ends with something like the moral of the story is, right? And you can remember that years later because what stuck with you was the takeaway, that single summarization of that one line. Similarly, when you think of business presentations, you always remember what was the one thing that stuck. This is how you have to think about narrating your story. In common lingo, you refer to this as elevator pitch, where you can complete something in 20 to 25 seconds time. And this is how you can look at the story as a summary of the story. You start with looking at what the one takeaway sentence is. You write it down, and you have to think about that one takeaway story in, is it simple enough? Is it complete? Does it complete your thought process? Does it deliver what you want the user to take away with? And will your audience whom you're pitching the story, will they even care about this outcome? So this is the most critical skill in any data storytelling. Can you crystallize your intent and message in a way that can land with the intended audience? Let's take one example and look at a supporting structure. The general rule of thumb is that you start with the key takeaway. You have to start with the takeaway. Then you look at adding supporting material to your message, because takeaway is what grabs the attention. Once you grab the attention, you have to have supporting content which supports the takeaway. And when you start detailing this information, you have to be very clear that you must first prove the message. You shouldn't give all the analysis that you have. For example, let's look at the example on the right. Launch sales were 30% less than target due to high competition. So you launched and you had a target projection for 20 million sales, but you only landed at 14 million. So sales in every region were 20 to 50% lower depending on the region. But you don't have to specifically call out that in Philippines and Korea we met the targets. That is not significant because your takeaway message is the launch sale targets were not met. Then you give substantiating supporting takeaways to explain what happened. This is of interest because, okay, you say the intended target was not reached. Why didn't we not reach it? Then you follow it up with the explanation. Competitors discounted their prices heavily to match our launch. So there were stores that were discounting at 15 to 35%, but we couldn't match that discounts because 20% was the sustainable discount that we had planned for. Higher discounts were not possible. And stores offering higher discounts were not able to generate incremental sales. So that's how you narrate that entire story, keeping very crisp message in mind. When you arrange your message in a hierarchical fashion in this manner, you are essentially aiding the solution. So if you go back to the three examples that we looked at, for which we had run through the analysis, the problem statement, the insights, and then the outcome. This is what the storyline that we presented to back to our clients. For the purchasing commodities, we were clear enough to focus on reducing the number of vendors for specific products, ICG in this plant, FRS in this plant, and SWB in this plant. By doing this, we forecasted a 40% reduction in logistics costs and vendor costs. In order to substantiate this, we had supporting material which said for the ICG spend among the highest at 6.9 million pounds. So this is a big number to go behind. Similarly, plant 126 has orders that are 40 times a week, which is so high. And also for the same vendor, they were ordering 15 to 20 times in the same week. So this is the kind of substantiation you give. Similarly, for the cargo delay, airline cargo delay problem, what we called out was to reduce the turnaround time to 1.5 hours, increase the number of forklifts from 1 to 2 in each shift, and the number of train staff from 4 to 6 in evening shift. This is a kind of narrowed explanation that we had gone in from a story standpoint. Thereby, the output is very clear. The action is also summarized. And if you look at the churn model, here the prediction that we had conveyed was if a customer has not called anyone in the last 5 to 14 days, roughly 2-week window, and they have not made a recharge less than X amount of dollars in the last entire quarter, make them a retention offer. And what should that retention offer be is a recommendation that we had passed on. If you look at each of these, you have gone through the series of identifying the problem statement, the data insights, narration of the qualified insights, then you have a story. Now the next step is how do you present this story? This is where bulk of the folks in business today struggle, be it data analysts, data scientists, managers, consultants, everyone struggles with this problem. How many of you have had an experience where you sit in a presentation and you're wowed by someone who presented something? Just the sheer way of they presented their story. Could I take a show of hands in the chat? Have you had that experience anytime where you had seen someone presenting some data and you were wowed by it? Yes, I see some yeses flowing through. So thank you for the feedback. Now let's look at what is that story pattern that we have to take. For the three examples that we talked about, this is what we have presented. Some of the information is anonymized for practical reasons. So you can take away is, if you look at the subject line, European brewery identifies 15 million cost saving after consolidation of vendors. That's the clear title takeaway. This is what we have accomplished. You are starting with a clear message for the audience. You're explaining the problem. You're getting low volume discounts. Then you're talking about your high logistic costs. And you're also pointing out the problem that whenever you go to plant managers, they complain about, that's not the case with my plant. That's not the only way. No one else does better. I'm doing the best possible thing in my plant. That's the kind of messaging that you get back. So when you programmatically approach this, you analyze the data, you crunch the data, and you present the information. This representation on the right is how we have seen the value of storytelling play out, where you can look all the plants and how they are performing on various parameters, each dot representing the size of the order that was being placed from that particular plant across categories and from how many vendors. So this clearly highlights that plant 126 was one making so many orders, and they having orders to the same vendor in smaller quantities. And when you go with this level of compelling information back to a plant or a manager and show them, this is the analysis, this is the outcome, and this is the action we want to take, we were able to demonstrate a 15 million pound potential savings by action on these. Similarly, the vendor based count was reduced by 40% when this whole solutioning was implemented. If you take the next step of the airline cargo system, same structure. The story that you had was to look at how do I improve my sales, how do I improve my turnaround time for taking the goods that are shipped from the plane to the warehouse. And in each of these exercises, when we narrated that story by combining it with a visual chart, we noticed that we're able to quickly identify most of the problems are originating on morning shift, where specifically on Fridays is what we see the trouble as. And on Fridays too, the product category that has the most trouble is ZDH category. And ZDH category is fragile items. And fragile items too, when the box is 20% packed, these are the ones that cause the most delays. So you can combine your analysis, combining it with narration, and you see that there is a reduction in average turnaround time from 1.76 hours to 1.5 hours. And that results in a 34% reduction in worst case turnaround time scenarios. So this is the kind of power that engaging storytelling combined with data analysis can summarize your outcomes. And this is active. In the interest of time, I'll move forward. And this is the churn prediction model where you're talking about how do I identify those customers who I offer or promotions, a top up. If my outgoing calls are less than 15 in a given quarter, I want to give them a recharge. If they had done a recharge, yes, then you don't have to give them an offer. But if they haven't not done a recharge recently, what was the last amount that they had recharged for? Based on the decision, I will identify a decision tree model and narrow down to identifying who are the customers that I would want to extend the $10, $20 top ups so that we can retain them for a next higher period. This is kind of additional value that you see when you start combining the analysis with storytelling and a structure. Now, the logical question now would be, how do I pick a format? Because each client, each audience, each business statement has different intents. So this is flowchart that we had put together on identifying the right format of storytelling. I would share this deck for everyone post the session. So please don't have to grab a screenshot or write it down. I will share this deck for everyone to consume. So there are different formats of static slides, interactive slides, storytelling, scroll telling, where you see a scrolling window, you have interactive dashboards, you have reports that are created, posters, videos, and infographics. Each of these serves specific purposes, and this structure is what allows you to tackle that. Similarly, once you pick a visual, you also have to understand whether the content that goes into the takeaway, what should it be? We have put in a structure for that as well, so you can think about utilizing this. Let's look at one area of storytelling, which is charts. In business workflows, putting out a summary chart and explaining the chart is a very common occurrence. How many of you would agree that there is no presentation, documentation, or anything where you don't see charts? It's a most commonly used, right? Be it bar charts, craft, any of these. Charts are the most common representation, right? So I will focus on charts alone for a little more. How do you make a chart engaging? there are a couple of ways that you can look at making charts a little more engaging rather than taking an Excel output or a PowerPoint output or a Power BI or a Tableau output and pasting it somewhere else. This additional thought of 10 to 15 minutes if you spend on a chart, you can make it much more engaging. Step one, you can explain and interpret the visual verbally. You can call out what this chart means. This is a chart of all the class 10 students who have taken an English exam in Tamil Nadu in the year of 2011. The x-axis is the total number of students, the total marks from 0 to 100, and y-axis is the total number of students who scored that marks. So you're conveying what you're explaining things. Second, you're summarizing the chart's takeaway. The red line here summarizes that teachers add marks to stop some students from failing because the pass mark is 35. You see that magically 35 has a high bump across the board. So teachers are adding that grace marks to get students to pass. Then if you add annotations for specific areas you want to call out, the red one clearly talks about large number of students passing at exactly 35. Whereas there are few students, but not zero, who are getting 31 to 34. So some of the teachers who are scoring, they are sticking to 31 to 34. They're not adding that grace mark of 1, 2, 3, 4 marks to pass the students. What this means is the recommended action here is essentially what do you act upon? If some of the students, by virtue of the teacher being generous, are benefiting from a policy of grace marks, should there be a structured way of including a policy? That is the takeaway for students or the teachers. So a structure that you can follow is SEER. You have to summarize what the chart is. You have to explain what the chart is. You have to annotate areas of the chart that you see as important and focus for attention. And you also have to make a recommendation based on what the chart info is. What is the recommendation that others have to take? So in summary, you are looking at a broad 9 steps to follow as a structure. A, you identify who the audience is. That will determine your story. You identify what the problem is. That determines your analysis. You find the right analysis to solve because that is critical to ensure you have a good story to narrate. Then you identify the different insights that you have and distill them through big, useful, and surprising categorization that we went through. Once you have these insights, you start with the takeaway of what you want the consumers of the information to go with. Then you add supporting analysis so that once they are hooked on the takeaway, they can also see the substantiating information provided to them. Then you pick a format which best narrates the insight. Then you pick a good visual design. And last, you annotate your examples so that the type of narrative that goes along with it creates an impact. This is a broad structure that we use at Gramener in all our enterprise commercial engagements to ensure the data analysis that we do using different techniques is put through a proper storytelling structure so that the end output that is available, this is engaging, it creates impact, it creates virality, and people act on it. This is how we demonstrate business value to our end customers today through this structure of data storytelling when it's combined with data analysis and packaged as engaging data stories for our consumers. So time check, we are at 10:45. The last point I want to make is all the tools, all the frameworks, all the structure that I had gone through so far, it would make your data speak, but only to a point, not beyond. This is a realization even we have, in spite of working on data storytelling as a core practice for a little over a decade now, we still realize there are bottlenecks and there are areas where the storytelling cannot improve the value, because if the data is not good, if the data can't generate insights, any amount of storytelling will not improve any value. Okay, Giri, in the interest of time, should we open up for Q&A, Giri?
Yes, Sundeep, we can do that. So, hey everyone, if you have any questions, you can post on chat box today for a, usually we ask them post on Q&A, but yeah, you can post on chat box the Q&A. So yeah, we will take it up.
Okay, so I'll start with the Q&A then. I have a little over 17 questions and coming, so
Yes,
I'll get started, Giri.
I'll watch out the box.
Sure. The first question is, how much time will it take to learn data science, just basic knowledge? If I would break that answer into two parts. If you're familiar with programming, the data science learning curve would be a little over 6 to 8 weeks if you have programming comfort. So picking up anything like Python or R would essentially be that cycle. If you're not familiar with programming, the learning curve is a little longer. This is assuming that you're looking at programming roles alone, which are data scientists and all. But data science as a space has a lot more skills requirement. As we just looked at, you need data storytellers, you need data consultants who understand translation of a business problem to a data problem. So those skills can be learned much faster. So that would be my answer. The next question is, do we create different models to answer the questions from a business stakeholder? It's from VR, and there is a follow-up question. For personalization and recommendation applications, do we create personas for each individual? To your first question, VR, creation of different models to answer questions is the ideal route, but practically that is not possible because you're always constrained with the time, availability of data, and patience of your end users to wait for answers. So you try to strike a balance between what is the most logical grouping of these end users so that you can identify a minimum set of problems to solve for. Think about it like when you run a hierarchical clustering, you create a dendrogram, right? And in the dendrogram, you try to identify what is the line at which I draw the demarcation for a number of clusters. You have to take the similar mindset at identifying the right number of models. And for recommendation and personalization, creating personas for each individual is not recommended. You have to find a higher hierarchy for creation of personas. The next question is, in understanding more about data storytelling, is there a best source of learning? Karthikeyan, I would recommend, if you look at the screen right now, I have put up some links, Karthikeyan, gramener.com/storylabs. It has a treasure trove of information on how you can do data storytelling. And there are examples on our website that you can look at. There is collaterals. So please feel free to take it from there. If you still need any additional help, you can hit me at LinkedIn or Twitter. I'll be happy to assist and put you in touch with the right people. Then we have Harsha. How do we arrive at insights in the first place? From enormous data we have for a particular problem we are looking at. Any thoughts on this? Harsha, very thoughtful question. And this is the struggle that we always have. What we have seen helps us more is identifying the business problem. The first slide that I had pulled up, if I may go back quickly to that slide. I'm just pulling this. This particular slide, Harsha, where we talk about the 4 steps of a journey. Stage 1, when you identify the right business problem to solve and translate that to a data problem, we are essentially able to narrow down the entire data which is available for enterprise. Enterprise are very happy to talk about, we have big data, we have Hadoop, we have petabytes of data. But if you think about it, the specific business problem that you want to solve, when you crystallize and prioritize it, it is actually answered from a subset of the data. That is the best route we have noticed of working with large volumes of data. And hypothesis is always created keeping in mind the business outcome. We have someone anonymous. Bus classification kind of variables and can be changed from person to person, or is it irrespective of the person opinion? The bus classification is always opinionated. It is opinionated. That is the whole point of bus. And the way you can drive standardization in interpretation of insights is if you have a common baseline understanding of business metrics, then it moves away from personal bias to a team level understanding, common understanding. The next question from Sai: how to get correct data for analysis, and how do we know that the data we obtain is genuine, correct, sufficient? Sai, what you have pointed out is commonly referred to as data quality and data governance problem. It is one of the toughest challenges that has not been solved even today. Because accuracy of data and relevance of the data can only be ascertained when you see the results at the end. And without investing time in seeing the results, the chances of we quantifying whether it is genuine or correct data is tough. And that is where taking an approach of pilot-driven approach of doing audits on the data beforehand, doing the EDA, in the EDA step specifically paying attention to missing values, categorical values, canonical values, and making inferences and tying it back to the business problem that you're trying to solve is a better way to avoid late burn of finding that the whole data that you picked up was wrong. And this is where having data consultants who understand the business and they can tie things back to data becomes very critical. The next question is from Nishant. How do I get to know what are the data factors I need to consider to solve a problem statement? Nishant, if you look at the slide I'm posting, stage 1, when you define the business problem and you can translate the business problem to a data problem, that is how you identify the features. By virtue of defining the data problem, you're clearly calling out the subset of features of the entire population which are of relevance to solve that business problem. Once you get to that narrower point, it becomes a case of feature engineering to identify further. and do hyperparameter tuning and optimization based on those features. Next question from Nishant is, how do I get the expertise on which type of visualization suits to given context? Nishant, the slide I had put up, I'll share that. That gives a broad overview of what kind of visuals to pick. Some other ways you can do it is if you go to ft.com/visual vocabulary, they have a treasure trove of which, based on the type of data that you have and the type of analysis you're running, they have a large recommendation of analysis. Next question we have from Karthik. Annotations and recommendations will make sense in case of a PPT. Any pointers on how to design dashboard? Great question, Karthik. Annotations and all essentially is a subset of your ability to write JavaScript on the code. If you're doing, say, a Plotly or a D3 chart, these annotations are essentially the JS code that sits on top. So that is the best case you can do this. And off late, you have tools that would allow you to pinpoint on a slide and start typing notes. So it is doable, but that skill of writing JavaScript to do annotations is not easy, because you have to balance out the speed of load, the interactivity, the out callouts. Each of these has its own challenges. From Mani Deepak, how important is visualization versus presenting data in the form of a table? Would you, okay. The importance of a visual is twofold, Mandeepak. The visual would essentially make it easier for someone to say, I can quickly grab something from the visual if the visual is done right. Tabular formats are only helpful for sorting and getting a quick summary of top-down or bottom-up approach for one column. So in my view, if I were to decide between a visual and a table, I would go with a visual. But if you look at Excel, and Excel has conditional formatting for cars and bar charts, right? That is kind of a fusion between a tabular form and a visual, where Excel does a pretty good job at that. One anonymous, there is a confusion on bus. Okay, let me pull that slide up again to make it helpful. So here we go. The intent of putting each of the insight through the bus framework is to ensure that we understand that insight is, it either has to be big so that you can grab people's attention. It has to be useful, because if it's not useful, I hear what you're saying, but it's not useful to me. No one will be interested to hear further. And it has to be surprising. If it's surprising, you pay attention. If I tell you that Warren Buffett's Berkshire Hathaway has one stock that contributes 43% of their portfolio, would that surprise you? Let's see if in the chat window, did that insight surprise you? Warren Buffett, who is known as a legendary investor, has one stock that has 43% of the portfolio. That's very counterintuitive, right? You think he will distribute it in so many other companies, but no. Apple stock contributes to 43% of their portfolio today. So that's the power of insight that is surprising. By going through this structure, you can essentially identify which one will land more, which one will not land. Hope that helps. Many times data is dynamic, so annotation is not possible. What would you suggest? If in this example, if you notice the first story that I put up, which is my personal experience, I took a annotation of a competition baseline. I put up a annotation for expert time. So this is how we can adjust dynamic data, identify those baselines that everyone can understand, so that even if the data bars keep changing, your baseline helps them to have a correlation and reference. The next question from Valkal Bairagi is how to create deep dive views which can engage, answer everything in one go. Creation of a deep dive view and everything in one go is not possible, Valkal, in my opinion. In all the attempts that we had made at Gramener to solve that specific problem, we have been unsuccessful. But on the other hand, what we have been able to do is, let me pull this up if I can quickly. Excuse me. So something like decision tree. One moment, please. I'm trying to see how I can minimize this window. We have a concept called insight trees that I will I'll include in part of the response. Apologies. Okay, I'm sorry, I can't pull it up, but in our website, we have a bunch of tools that essentially try and address this particular problem of taking on problem areas and giving in a flexibility to do deep dive of the data. So it's called Decision Tree Insights. If you go to our website and you can search for it, you'll find that. The next one from Shweta Jaiswal is any specific resources for storytelling the way you explain. Books and articles, if you go to our Story Labs page, we have a ton of collaterals and informative links that we have put in there. So please feel free to go to that. If you still need help, my contact information, you can reach out to us. We'll be happy to assist. Which one you prefer, Tableau or Power BI for data visualization? Both tools are good at what they do. So there is no, in my own experience with both the tools, I don't see any difference between either of them. It's essentially boils down to the way how Tableau and Power BI can sell their offerings to someone. Power BI, by virtue of being in the Microsoft ecosystem, Microsoft being a largest player in enterprise IT space, their ability to sell Power BI licenses to enterprise is much easier. So they can easily undercut on price. Tableau, on the other hand, has a unified BI tool market where they don't have any other cross-sell levers to push. So other than that, I don't see any difference between the two from a capability standpoint. And next one from Kaushiki Mukherjee. Give references for content you taught just now. All right, it's in the last slide that I put up. So Kaushiki, you can once you get it, you can see from that. And how to improve skills in data science. Practice, practice, practice. There is no shortcut for that. And I started my data analysis journey a little over 14 years ago, working through Excel files, then DBs, then into BI tools, and then into Python, then into cloud-based services now. So even today, I struggle with analysis. So that's the only thing I can suggest is practice. Question from Bharat Bhushan: how do we handle mixed audience? Whenever you are handling mixed audience, the best approach that I have seen is set the stage outright that of the population of audience that is available, you are going to target these broad buckets of audience and tailor make your narration to these buckets. That way, you are at least ensuring that you are logically determining which of these buckets you're going to answer so that you are very clear you're disappointing a set of people so that there is no friction. You know for a fact these people are not being addressed and you can get back to them later so that you can at least focus on the analysis that you have made for a specific set of people. How do you decide on threshold of considering low, medium, high for big insights? It is essentially a case of you looking at the impact, because an insight is contextual to the business that you're working on. You decide that thresholds of low, medium, high. Which programming language should we learn first, Python or R? This is an age-old struggle for Kwan. My suggestion, again, I'm biased because I don't know R, I only know Python. And I have seen that Python helps you with both data analysis, machine learning, deep learning, as well as application building. My recommendation would be Python. What are the techniques we have to use to convince leadership to sponsor an analytics project? The technique is to demonstrate business value that you can bat for. Identify a good business problem and justify why that problem is worth solving, number one. Two, demonstrate that that problem can be solved using a technical approach. Three, demonstrate which KPI you would specifically target to improve and quantify its potential savings in terms of increasing the top line, in terms of more revenue, or reducing the bottom line in terms of improving efficiencies. This is the structure that has helped us to go back for newer projects. The next one is how to design compelling charts. I have used softwares like Tableau, Power BI, but doesn't look good, appealing, minimalistic when I create. Is there a specific way? Looking at visual vocabulary as a guiding principle would be helpful. Tableau has a visual vocabulary. Even on Gramener website, if you go to our website, you will see recommendation of vocabularies. So this is the structure that would generally help. A quick time check. Giri, we are at 11:59. Can I continue, or should we take a
I think
pause?
we're okay to go. Yeah, please. Another 5 minutes
Okay.
is fine. Yeah, I have a few more questions that I posted in chat box. So what I'm doing is I'm going to send you in private. Yeah.
Oh, Giri, why don't you read those questions out then? Let's go through those. I've been looking at Q&A. So if you can call out some questions from chat, I'll answer those.
Okay. So there are the few questions which I picked up. So like, there's one question says, often we start with the executive summary of insights because leadership in the first few years, but in the right engagement, what should be the right format? So there are also few, follow-up question onto it, senior management or stakeholders, they always think in a traditional way approach to look at the insights. So
Correct.
if you can address all together once.
Sure. That's a practical problem we face today. And the only way to shake things off is you having strong conclusion and strong insights to narrate. If you go into a senior management meeting and say that this KPI for this business function, we have improved it at this level because of our action. It does not have to be any structured way of executive summary, what we did, what is the data, none of it matters. If you can create that kind of impact. So the whole structure that we went through in the last 40 minutes essentially is geared towards that. How do you reduce the clutter of getting to the insight and narrating it as a story and making it engaging? If you can summarize all of it, if you go to any senior management presentation, or you generally prepare a deck of like 40, 50, 60 slides, right? And the back of the mind thinking is that I need to have all the information if a question comes up. That is how we think, and we start elaborating in that fashion. But if you shake off from that and have a crispier presentation with just 10 slides, for example, let me give one practical place where this is being put to use. Jeff Bezos has a rule of thumb. Many of you might know this, but I'm just reiterating it again. In their weekly reviews of Amazon divisions, all the 18 division heads sit in, there is no presentation. There is a 3-page summary that is shared across all 18 divisions, which is summarized and presented as a printout in digital format. And everyone is expected to read through it. That's it. So every division gets a very short portion of the entire 3-pager to summarize what is that they did in that week. So think about it. If someone like Jeff Bezos, Amazon, with such kind of complexity of business can simplify that, I see no reason why we can't do it in our individual projects and engagements we work with. Giri, next
Yeah,
question, please.
that's a great example to pull it up. Thank you. So there is another question from Mitesh. He asks, while storytelling is important, that you covered it anyway. So we have next question from Chandrasekharam. So having data right will help us envision what we intend to do. However, is there a technique or way to verify or validate the correctness of data? So there are multiple questions about the quality of the data or data collection. What data, what attributes to be used, to get the better insights. So maybe you can address all those data issues.
Sure. This question I think had come up earlier too in terms of data quality. This is a persistent challenge, and the only way you can put a lid on data quality is if the business problem is clear and the expected outcome is identified beforehand. Then you can, during the EDA exercise, you can run through a series of checks, standardized EDA protocols. There is a bunch of literature on what is the best practices to do EDA. That would essentially allow you to establish whether the quality of data that you are looking at can even solve the intended problem. This is the best case. This is the only place where I think we have a control to determine whether the data is good or not. Once we miss this opportunity, the subsequent efforts that we put in data analysis, feature engineering, summarization, aggregations, all of it is mute because it won't solve the primary business problem. Okay.
Thanks. So I have I'm picking up next question. Question from the Rajmati. So what are some of pre-model analysis tools that can be help to do effective analysis that there is a pain point before we even building a model? So give us some recommendations.
I have a little struggle with that question, Giri.
Understanding
I
it?
didn't
Okay,
quite.
put it up again. So what are some of the pre-model analysis tools that can help to do effective analysis? So
Okay.
there is a pain point in before even modeling.
All right. Thank you, Giri. I'm sorry I didn't get that first time. Apologies. So my preferred tool to do EDA before going into analysis is OpenRefine. This is an open source package that was put out by Google. It's an OpenRefine as a tool allows you to do a bunch of analysis on data, be it canonical data, categorical data, numbers, all of it, and it has a large army of even textual-based analytics where it does similar row aggregations and things like that. That essentially gives you a greater confidence going into data. Even before you get to the model, the quality of data and the view of the data is established using OpenRefine. Some of the tools that do this well are you have Wrangler, that's again a good tool to use. You have Talent, that's one more tool that you see in the market, which is again open source, and you have trial versions for that. And there are a series of data quality packages in Python, the EDA packages in Python, which do the same job. So each of these are different paths that you can take to validate and ensure that data quality is in place before you start modeling with the confidence that you understand the data well. Okay.
Yeah.
Giri, there's one question I would like to take.
Yeah.
May I?
I think
There
there
is
is not much questions in
there is a
the,
question: how useful is data analysis and science in times of crisis like the one currently? A brilliant question, because we see this play out in the market today, and that's the reason I want to answer this question. In the pandemic, in the current situation, every organization goes through three stages of growth. You survive the current pandemic, then you stabilize, and then you look at strategic growth again. In each of these phases, the only lever that the companies would have to improve their operations or anything is through application of data analytics and data science approaches. For I'll give you two examples. I won't get far, just two. For a logistics warehouse provider in the US, when the pandemic hit, the biggest struggle for them was how do you reduce the turnaround time of trucks that are pulling into the warehouse? Because earlier it was not a bigger pain point, but now even getting business is a struggle. So if a truck is rolling in, their focus was to ensure the turnaround time is always less, so that any goods that come in go out can be serviced faster. So in a 6-week period, we worked with the client to build a forecasting model for turnaround time and optimal scheduler using predictive modeling to ensure every warehouse, that is, they have little over 600 warehouses in the US, can actually use the tool to schedule all incoming appointments in a way that they can service clients. Because the worry is at this time, this is survival. Earlier, if you had a client waiting in the truck for an hour and not yet at the dock without any action, there was no problem, because where will they go? But today the business volume itself is very low, so anyone who's coming in has to be satisfied. If not, they lose business. Similarly, in the stabilization phase, you look at optimization of your works lines. That's where data science will play into growth. And at the same time, when you start looking at strategizing growth, even there, data science will play a very critical role that would differentiate players who are fluent with adoption of data and data related strategies versus companies who are not looking at these. Giri, over to you.
yeah. So there is one question about the validation score for the each modeling. So let me read out for you. So when we are working on building a model, and we are in a situation where the validation score is as low as 30 to 40%. So in such cases, how do we build a story in order to catch the attention of our clients and make them trust? I'm sure the score needs to be more, but anyway, do you want to answer that question?
Sure. The basic premise of that question, if is you are worried that the validation score of 40% is not good enough, right? That is the primary crux of the fear.
Yes, yes.
Yeah. Again, I'm being a little I'm jumpy on that, but that is the reality. Let me give a parallel example. That way you understand that the number is not the problem. It is how we convey the results. Most of you must have heard about computer vision modeling, right? Of image classification. The solutions like ImageNet that have been trained on a million more million plus objects. So let me, Giri, this will be the last one, Giri, I promise. I'll not pull up anything
No,
else after
take
this.
that. As long as
Uh,
Python stay back, I'm no issues at all.
okay, so let me pull up just one example for you. This is if you go to our website, you can get to this. It's a model output comparison solution that we had built, where we summarized for ImageNet results. We took TensorFlow's pre-trained models across these different models and aggregated them for analysis. So if I look at, I'll just take a picture. Let's take this airplane picture, and I run it through this model. Now, if you notice from a visual eye, you see there is an airplane. You have these different people standing, right? Now, each of these models, supposedly, ImageNet is trained on little over 1.48 million pictures, right, worldwide, and it is used as a baseline for any computer vision modeling. Now, if you look at this, none of these models accurately call it as an aircraft or a commercial airfight. Any of these, some of the models have as low as 5.4%, calling it as a prairie chicken. Of all the things, it's associating this plane with a chicken. Now, this is exact struggle you run into even when you're in your analysis. How do I take some analysis that I've done that has very low score, and do I bat for it or do I not bat for it? The approach that we generally take is, just give me one. I'm firing up a Shiny server to show you this exact piece. The way we have worked through that problem this is an example of we working with one of our clients in agribusiness based out of Southeast Asia, where we had built a forecasting algorithm on the price of viscose in market. Based on that, whether they have to buy more or sell more. Because the accuracy prediction of these products of these model was less, the structure we had taken was, instead of convincing you that at 40% model accuracy you have to make this decision, we took a tack of running that model for a fixed amount of time and showed them the confidence of the model's prediction over a period of time. Like for the past 4 weeks of this analysis, where we predicted this was the upper bound and lower bound, and the actual value was the value within the thresholds of 95% confidence interval, or in standard deviation 1D or 2D. By narrating results in this fashion, you bring in confidence of the business teams to say, tell them that our prediction stands within the statistical thresholds. At that point, you do not have to worry about whether my prediction was 40% accurate or 50% accurate based on the test I have done. You shift the baseline to a usability of that insight on the business side.
Yeah.
All right, Giri, over to you.
Yeah, thank you so much. I think we're done with the questions in my chat box, bro. Do you have any to answer in the Q&A?
One moment, Giri, I'm just taking a look. See a bunch of questions coming through. So, okay, I have a question from Nikhil, which says, is storytelling the make or break for any data science project? I'm a little biased on that, Nikhil. I would say yes, because doing the analysis, there are n number of providers in the market who can do that analysis. Anyone who can write a scikit-learn in Python, scikit-learn dot cluster comma method can do an analysis. But can you explain that analysis? That is where it is. So I would say storytelling will really lift the baseline. We have Rajmati. Question is, what are some of the pre-model analysis tools? Okay, I think Giri, you took that up. Yeah, you took that question. Okay. I'm considering changing my field to data science apart from acquiring knowledge. Can I capture practical skills? So, Abhyudaya, the only way is practice, practice, practice. When you're trying to change field, retain the domain knowledge that you have gained from the current work experience and try and apply the new skills of data analysis, data storytelling on that work. You would realize that you can do a terrific job of combining your current knowledge with analytics and package them for a good narration. The next question is, could we take the COVID stats and rather uninteresting or misleading stories that we keep getting reported? This is Dilip Thosar. Could we take the COVID stats and rather uninteresting or misleading stories that keep getting reported? I'm presuming your question is, with the current data that is available, can you create any good stats? The short answer is yes. Let me see if I can pull one real quick.
Okay, Sundeep, sorry to pause you there. So, hey everyone, we have posted the link in chat box. This link is for submitting your feedback about the session. So please, feel free to submit your feedback. You can, the link is open up to 12:30, I believe.
Oh, nice. Thank you for that, Giri. Everyone, thank you for attending the session. I would really appreciate if you could share your feedback on the feedback form that Giri just pinged in the chat. It would help me in two purposes. A, whether the content and the approach that we use in Gramener, does it add value to you as individuals who came here? I want to understand that. And what are the areas that we can do to improve such content in terms of expanding it to everyone to consume? That would be of interest. So I would really appreciate if you could help us with the feedback. We will be sharing this deck. Giri, I'm presuming if can send the deck to you, you would be able to share it with the participants?
Yeah. So we also have a plan to share the recording, but the recording editing will be
Wonderful.
taking time, but we will share the deck. Yeah.
Wonderful. Okay, how about this? While Giri works through the process, I'll also post this deck on both my LinkedIn and Twitter handles in the next 1 hour. Sound good?
Works.
Wonderful. So please, I would request each of you to run and submit the feedback. So I'll be looking forward to that feedback. Giri, is it possible to keep the form open for a little longer? I think you mentioned half an hour, right?
Yeah, we can do that.
All right, Giri. Wonderful. Okay, shall we call it off, Giri? Call it a day now?
Yeah, so I think most of you guys are asking about certifications or education on data science, or maybe the courses to pursue or where to start or all that. So as you might have come across, we have a program called Advanced Management Program in Business Analytics at ISB, which is a 15 months long program for working professionals. So my session is you can explore the program. If you're interested, start sending your queries, like our team would be able to answer all those queries, or you can even write to our Institute of Data Science email ID. We'll be able to connect you to the admissions team there, right? So Sundeep, Still there? Sandeep?
Yes, Giri, I'm on. Yeah, Giri, I'm on.
Okay. So thank you so much, Sundeep, once again. So it was
Pleasure.
really amazing session. I'm sure participants have been enjoying this session throughout, all of your presentation there. So thank you everyone once again for joining us today. We will look forward, for your participation for the upcoming sessions. So next weekend we have a session on robotic automation process. So we will share the details by Tuesday or Wednesday, so that we look forward to having you there as well. Sandeep, thank you so much. Have a nice
Thank you,
weekend.
Giri, and the ISP team.
Thank
Have a
you all.
nice day ahead.
Bye.
Bye.